Hey, I'm golf broadcaster Matt Adams. The updated and expanded second edition of my book, The Golf Round I'll Never Forget, Golf's Biggest Stars Recall Their Finest Moments, is now available. Readers can expect to march with Arnie's Army at the 1960 U.S. Open, relive Jack Nicklaus's remarkable 1986 Masters win, and be amazed by the Tiger Slam. The Golf Round I'll Never Forget, Golf's Biggest Stars Recall Their Finest Moments. Pick it up where fine books are sold, including BarnesandNoble.com and Amazon.com.
This Day in Sports History. Welcome back to This Day in Sports History, a member of the Sports History Podcast Network, your headquarters for the yesteryear of your favorite sports. Learn more and find additional podcasts at sportshistorynetwork.com. It's June 19th, and on this day in 1986, the basketball world was shocked by the death of Len Bias. This wasn't supposed to happen. A healthy athlete, a guy who had everything in front of him. Money, for sure. Fame, likely. Championship rings on his fingers, a very real possibility. Basketball immortality? Not too hard to fathom. But instead, on this day, Len Bias proved he was mortal. A man who could do just about anything on a basketball court. The ACC Player of the Year at Maryland, scoring 23 points a game as a senior. Selected 2 days earlier by the Boston Celtics with the second overall pick. A dream come true for Bias. He was the heir apparent to Boston's Larry Bird, and a man that could rival Chicago's Michael Jordan, so much so that Reebok signed him to a shoe deal less than 24 hours earlier. Bias's shoes were going to rival the Air Jordans for sure. But instead, another ending was written to Len Bias's story, a tragic one. A whirlwind of travel after being selected by the Celtics on the night of the 17th, a trip to Boston to meet team officials and the press, back to D.C., back to Boston, back to D.C. He put his name on a lot of official documents, and yet, not long after the ink dried on his signature, he was gone. At 6:30 a.m., a call came into the 911 dispatcher. The caller kept telling the dispatcher, "It's Len Bias. It's Len Bias. You can't let him die. It's Len Bias." It took a few more moments for the dispatcher to get some details about what was happening, and soon an ambulance was on the way to a dorm on the University of Maryland campus. Bias had been partying with teammates David Gregg and Terry Long, along with friend Brian Tribble. The friends had been snorting cocaine. After doing one last line, Bias got up to go to the bathroom, stumbled, sat down on the bed, and then began having seizures. And then his heart stopped. While his teammates came to his aid, Tribble called Bias's mother and then 911. After considerable effort at the hospital, Bias could not be revived and was declared dead at 8:51 a.m. It wasn't long before reporters working the story reached out to others looking for reaction and quotes. When one reporter reached Bird at his home in French Lick, Indiana, he said, "That's one of the cruelest things I've ever heard." The news hit everybody like an anvil. In cases like this, it's easy to contemplate all the what-ifs. Investigations were conducted, inquiries were made, fingers were pointed, and surely somebody had to suffer some consequences. Brian Tribble, the man who was accused of supplying the cocaine ingested that night, was put on trial but acquitted due to lack of evidence. The Maryland Athletics Department and Lefty Drizel's basketball team were put under the microscope. Was the culture bad? Did Lefty know what was going on? Did his style allow it? Not long after, University Chancellor John Slaughter, Athletics Director Dick Dull, and Coach Lefty Drizel resigned along with the team's academic advisor. When Len Bias died on this day in 1986, he was 22 years old. A sad footnote to this story, though, is that less than 5 years later, on December 4th, 1990, Bias's brother Jay would die as a result of a shooting at a Baltimore shopping mall. Jay Bias was only 20. All right, let's change the tone of today's episode to something a little more upbeat. If you remember back a month ago on the May 19th edition of This Dish, I talked about the Houston Aeros of the World Hockey Association winning the Avco Cup with Gordie Howe and his sons Mark and Marty. Well, it was on this day in 1973 that all of that came to fruition as the Aeros were able to draw Gordie out of retirement with the chance to play with his sons At that point in the pre-Gretzky era, Gordie was the all-time leading scorer in the NHL, and for the rebel WHA to be able to get him to unretire and play with Houston was a huge deal. The league was gaining some credibility with the signing of Bobby Hull a year earlier, but bringing a 45-year-old legend to the league who could still skate, shoot, score, and deliver a well-timed check was big. 19-year-old Marty and 18-year-old Mark had both been drafted by the Aeros in the WHA draft the previous month. And with Gordie on the right side, Marty on the left wing, and Mark as a defenseman, the three often played on the same line for a little how magic. On this day in 1955, little-known golfer Jack Fleck pulled off one of the most surprising wins in a major tournament. The U.S. Open that year was played at the Olympic Club in San Francisco. Fleck was still working as a club pro in Davenport, Iowa, but was giving himself 2 years to make it on the PGA Tour. 6 months into his 2-year window, Fleck showed up at Olympic. After the first round, Fleck was 9 shots behind leader Tommy Bolt. Round 2 took its toll on Bolt, and he came back to the field. Fleck, on the other hand, tied for the best round of the day with a 69 to move into contention. Conditions continued to be tough on Saturday for the 36-hole marathon. Ben Hogan led after the third round at 7 over par. Fleck was 3 strokes back as they went to the afternoon round. Now, things were done a little differently then as now. Now the leaders are in the final group, or groups. But then, it wasn't done like that. Hogan went out ahead of several groups, and that led to some weirdness. NBC was providing coverage that day, and when Hogan tapped in for par at the 18th to finish with a 4-round total of 287, Gene Sarazen, providing color that day, congratulated Hogan on another U.S. Open victory. It would have been his 4th U.S. Open win in 6 years and his 5th overall. And then NBC signed off the broadcast for the night with golfers still on the course. Well, one of those golfers was Jack Fleck, 5 holes behind. Nobody gave him a chance to catch the mighty Hogan. Fleck came to the 18th needing a birdie to tie and force an 18-hole playoff the following day. His approach settled 8 feet from the cup, and he rolled it in for his birdie in a round of 67. In the Monday playoff, Fleck continued to surprise everyone by hanging with Hogan the entire way. And then he got a little bit of luck thrown his way, or maybe it's better to say Hogan fell on hard luck. With Fleck up 1 standing on the 18th tee, Hogan was teeing off first, but he slipped on a patch of sand on the tee box, and he dribbled his tee shot into the long U.S. Open rough. His next 2 swings only resulted in moving the ball about 5 feet. Eventually, he rolled in a 30-foot putt for a 6. Fleck rolled in his par putt for a 3-shot win. The 9-shot deficit he overcame in the first round is the largest overcome to win a U.S. Open. Fleck managed 2 more wins on the PGA Tour and contended again at the Open in 1960. Sadly, Fleck was forced to sell the gold medal he was awarded as a U.S. Open winner, using the money to try to salvage a golf course he owned in Arkansas. Even though we use terms in golf like sudden death playoff or classifying somebody who is having a really tough day on the links as dying out there, those are just euphemisms that help color our language. Well, on this day in 1977, sudden death could have become a reality. During the U.S. Open played that year at Southern Hills Country Club in Tulsa, Oklahoma, during the final round, leader Hubert Green stepped to the 15th tee, but was stopped by Tulsa police officers, who informed Green that a death threat had been phoned in against him. Green decided to play on and understandably was a little rattled. He pushed his tee shot right, which hit a tree, but that kept it from going out of bounds, so that was fortunate. He settled down enough to hit the green and then 2-putt for par. Police officers in riot gear accompanied Green the rest of the way, and the cameramen covering the action were requested to scan the gallery for a potential sniper. Green made a 4-foot par putt at the last to win his first major by a shot over Lou Graham. Green humorously said a few years later that when he putted out for the win, he called the potential sniper a chicken, but he didn't say it very loudly. And on this day in 1943, the NFL granted permission to the Philadelphia Eagles and the Pittsburgh Steelers to merge for 1 season due to the shortage of players during World War II. the team became known as the Steagles and played the 1943 season as this combined team, finishing the year with a winning record, which for the Eagles was kind of nice, since they had not had a winning record since 1933. They divided their home games between Pittsburgh's Forbes Field and Philly's Shibe Park. Who was the coach? Well, that's the funny part. The Eagles' Greasy Neal and the Steelers' Walt Kiesling were co-coaches, and like most football coaches, like all coaches, these two headstrong guys did not do well with that co-coaching arrangement. The idea was for Greasy to coach the offense and Kiesling to coach the defense, but they spent most of their time fighting with one another, and yet they still won more games than they lost. Time now for today's non-sports Did You Know? The next time you spill a little red wine on something you wish you hadn't, put some salt on it. Salt helps remove red wine stains. No guarantee, but it's worth a shot. That's all for now. I'll have more tomorrow on This Day in Sports History. This Day in Sports History is a member of the Sports History Podcast Network, your headquarters for the yesteryear of your favorite sports. Learn more and find additional podcasts at sportshistorynetwork.com. This has been an original Thrive Suite production.
Hey there, sports history fan. This is Arnie Chapman, a.k.a. the Football History Dude, and I hope that you enjoyed this recent episode presented by the Sports History Network and were able to learn some good old-fashioned sports history knowledge nuggets. I started the Sports History Network back in 2020 with the mission to help podcasters find a community of like-minded sports history nerds, as well as helping aspiring podcasters to start their own shows. We have a little bit over 30 shows on the network right now covering all sorts of sports history, but as far as I'm concerned, we're just at the toothpick in the ocean moment, that can't even figure it out because there's so much more coming. We wanted to create the ultimate headquarters for sports yesteryear, starting with Podcast Network and our website, but we're going to continue to move into other mediums as well. And here's the cool part, because we want you to be part of our team. So if you're interested in starting your own podcast, or maybe being a guest on one of our shows, or who knows, maybe even writing an article for us over on the website. Seriously, all you gotta do is reach out to us on the contact page over at sportshistorynetwork.com. You can be as technologically savvy as a Neanderthal tapping on a stone trying to figure out this whole hieroglyphics thing back in the day. Again, it doesn't matter, because even if you don't understand the whole podcast space, we have a production team that can pretty much help you out with doing everything. All you gotta do, head over to sportshistorynetwork.com, head to the contact page, fill it out. That message goes right to me, and I'll reach out to you as soon as I can. But for now, dude, I'm through if you're through.